but we came across toward the end of the 90s two equally horrific statistics. One, we are losing more than 1,000 veterans of the Second World War each day in America. That we are losing among our fathers and our grandfathers a direct connection to and oral history of this unusually and admirably reticent generation. That if we, the inheritors of the world they struggled so hard to create for us, did not stop and hear them out, we would be guilty of a historical amnesia too irresponsible to countenance. We would, of course, be entirely excused if we did not take on the Second World War. It is not even a cottage industry, it is a mansion industry in the United States, producing thousands of books and thousands of documentaries. But as we examined them, we began to see that most of them were interested in the context of the war and lacked intimacy. Those which were intimate focused on one particular moment and lacked the context. And nearly all of them seemed to us distracted unnecessarily by an interest in the generals and presidents who don't do the fighting and die, that were interested in the strategy and tactics that in fact abstract the human suffering that is at the heart of human beings going to war, that they were obsessed, as Americans often are, by guns and weaponry and armaments, that they get drawn inexorably to the evil, they understandably drawn to the evil of the Nazis, but somewhere along the line that interest metastasizes into a kind of fascination and it's sometimes an admiration that we found abominable. We also found that none of these films were willing to tell the story of the Second World War with the European and the Pacific and the home front conveyed simultaneously. That is to say, as it actually happened. Particularly in our field of documentaries, you would focus on the Pacific, or you would focus on the European, or you would focus on the home front, or you would spend a few episodes in one and the other. Nothing seemed to integrate what it was like to be at the experience of the war. The second statistic was just as bad as the first. It came from research done by the National Council on History Education and among a number of demoralizing facts about what our kids know and I guess most particularly don't know. One item stood out. It seems that an unacceptably large number of graduating high school seniors think we fought with the Germans against the Russians in the Second World War.
Oh my God.
These two awful facts, that we are losing our soldiers and losing our historical compass, finally got us to reconsider our stance that we not revisit the messy chaos of war. And of course, all of human life is chaotic, nothing more so than war. And our own emotional desire not to be forced back into that seeing of the elephant was too lame an excuse in the face of the urgency that we are losing literally our fathers and our grandparents. And so we set to work trying to do a different kind of film. We wanted to tell it entirely from the bottom up. If you aren't in this war, in combat, or waiting anxiously for somebody in that war to come back, you are not in our film. There are no Monday morning quarterback, no armchair historians describing the world. There'll be plenty of time for that, but we are losing these men. And very shortly, it will be impossible to do this film or anything like it. We couldn't have done it 10 years ago. They weren't talking. In 5 years, most will be gone. And the Second World War will be the province only of historians. And no matter how good they are, they will necessarily have to abstract what took place. We have the opportunity to listen to veterans say, I raised my rifle, I adjusted the sights for the wind, and I killed that man. And this is how I felt. And we have that throughout the film that we made. We decided to focus on individuals knowing full well that we couldn't tell the whole story, on a handful of individuals, most of whom come from 4 geographically distributed American towns: Waterbury, Connecticut, Mobile, Alabama, Sacramento, California, and tiny Laverne, Minnesota. Lynn and her team, Sarah, went there, spent 5 years visiting and revisiting these towns, getting to know where people lived, how they lived, where they ate, the movie palaces where they got the bad news from the newsreels, stayed behind and got to know the kids collecting scrap, the people who worked in the factories and worried and grieved about their loved ones. But most of all, got to know the veterans that would be followed off to war. Not the good war of our subsequent mythologizing, but the worst war ever. responsible for the deaths of nearly 60 million human beings. We were privileged to bear witness to their testimony, to be ushered into their lives, some speaking for the very first time about what they experienced in the war, sharing with us these privileged, isolated memories of what it was like to be a ball turret gunner in a B-17, to land at endless Pacific islands, to freeze to death in the coldest winter in European record during the Battle of the Bulge. They immersed us in the war. And we have struggled now for nearly 6.5 years to try to do justice, to try to honor the great gift they gave of us, of their accumulated memory, to organize a story of the Second World War, which is by all accounts arbitrary, random, abstract, but real in the experiences of what they went through, and give a sense of what everyone else who was in that war went through. These 4 towns could be any 4 towns. These 41 people that you meet in our film could be any one of the people who marched off the war or stayed behind in the face of that conflict. And we are, more than anything, privileged to have spent the time together as filmmakers and friends and colleagues struggling to tell the story, that we work in public television, that have provided us the platform to share our story with the country, that we have worked with the best publisher on earth, Alfred A. Knopf, to produce this book, and that you are all responding with ratings through the roof, and putting us on the bestseller list is a present we did not ever expect, and we are so grateful for that. And now to tell you